So then the opportunity came to work on Rikers, and I thought that since I want to do criminal justice reform work, I need to see what it's really like working there. And that's why I decided to take that opportunity. I knew it was going to be difficult because I read a lot about Rikers. I read Mary's book. I watched a lot of documentaries. I kept up with the news, but it was nothing like I expected. And it's different when you read about something and you're actually in it. So I started working on Rikers December 4th, 2023. And I resigned. My last day was September 20th. So that was about 9 months. And when I would tell people I'm going to work on Rikers, people would say, like, are you crazy? It's so dangerous. And I would say, well, I'm in the mental health unit. So it's a little different than being in the general population, because this is what I was told, that these mental health units have more mental health staff. There's not much violence. Patients are doing group, individual sessions. But like I stated, it was nothing that I thought it was going to be. So quickly, once I started working there, I saw individuals being locked in their cells. And at first, I thought that was unfair. But as I continued to work there, I saw that they were being locked in continuously, like week after week. When I first started working there, I thought, okay, maybe this is just for the day. But as time went on, I had patients who were locked in for over a month, 2 months. And that's when it really started to affect me. And I would see my patients in their cells locked in with feces smeared all over their cells, banging, screaming to get out. And a lot of times we would send them to Bellevue Hospital because Bellevue does have a prison ward, but not always did Bellevue Hospital accept them. And they would come back and go back to that same cell. Or if the cell was cleaned, they would go to a different cell. However, they were still locked in. So then the behavior continued again. And a lot of times the mental health staff try to advocate for these patients and talk to the officers about letting them out. Some would listen to us and would work with us, and some would say, oh, I'll do it on Saturday, not today, because something happened on the unit. And then Saturday came, Monday came, and the individual was still locked in. So it was difficult because we had to also just navigate which officer is going to be on the floor that day, because we knew which officers will lock the individual out and which will not. And just working there really impacted my mental health, seeing this. I had my office in the back, and I wasn't able to even concentrate at times because I would hear one of my patients scream and bang all day, yelling, help, help, get me out. And it was very difficult to just pretend like this is not happening and do my work. I even called my mom once while I was having lunch, and she heard this individual scream, and she was like, oh my God, Justyna, like, who's that screaming in the background? So it was all day and night. And I went into this job because I really wanted to help people that are incarcerated. And I thought I could make a difference, which I did make some differences, some small differences, but I saw how this is just a pattern and this is continuing being done. And I really felt like I can do more not working there, and doing more from the outside than being there. We had patients come out. Like, for example, one patient came out for a whole week and he did okay. And then I come back to work on Monday and he's locked in. And I asked the officers what happened. And since this is something that the officers, that DOC is not supposed to do, lock in people who are severely mentally ill, they kept no record of it. So a lot of times the officers couldn't tell us what happened. So in that particular case, the officer said, I wasn't here on the weekend. I don't know what happened, but I was told another female officer came on the unit to get water and he was staring at her and made her really uncomfortable. So they locked him back in his cell. And when he came out for that week, he was presenting with like odd behavior. He was like staring at me standing by the door, which, that did not bother me because this individual was severely mentally ill, locked in his cell for over a month with no access to medication. However, these officers didn't understand this and just said, well, he's looking at me weird, making me feel uncomfortable. So those were some of the things that I had to deal with. And like I stated, it just really impacted my mental health. It was very difficult to separate. And, as social workers, people in the helping profession were told, don't bring your work home. But it was really difficult to do that because I couldn't just forget about the patients who are screaming, banging, sitting in a cell full of feces and just pretend like everything's okay and go home and not think about that. So I really did see how it impacted my mental health. Going to work, I was very unhappy because I didn't know what I was going into. So I made the decision to resign. And while I was making this decision, I already had a plan that this is something I'm going to do. So I've been in contact with few individuals, lawyers, and I didn't do anything until the day I resigned, but I already had this plan because this was just very inhumane, unethical, and I really needed to do something about this. And I knew working there, I did not want to come forward because that would create a hostile, uncomfortable environment. So that was really my decision to leave. And once I left, like the next day, I contacted the lawyers that I've been speaking to, and we set up a meeting and decided what we're going to do next. So also the lawyers that I've been working with gave me few options, such as testifying before the Board of Corrections or going to reporters. And they also asked if I want my name out there, if I want to come out or not. And that was also a very difficult decision because I was concerned about the safety. I didn't know what DOC would do. I have a family, I have a child, so that was a big concern, but the lawyers did connect me to other whistleblowers that worked on Rikers, and we were able to speak to that, and that really helped with my decision. So we started working right away, and the Board of Corrections meeting was on Tuesday. And in order for me to be able to testify, they also wanted the story to be out. And that's how I was able to do an interview with Daily News. So the article came out Tuesday morning, and Tuesday I testified. And the response has been great. I've been receiving so much support, and I really didn't think that this would be so big. I knew this was, a horrible, terrible thing that they're doing, but I did not think that people were going to respond to this way. And I remember speaking to the lawyers and asking them, like, do you think, this is going to have a big impact or not? Because like, I know this is a huge deal, but I don't know how the public will feel. And they said yes, because the mental health units on Rikers, people say are safer, that patients get their medications, that there's no lock-ins. So they knew that the public would be shocked hearing this, that this is happening to severely mentally ill people. And just to go back to how they decompensated in their cell. Like I said, the patients were screaming, yelling. They experienced auditory and visual hallucinations because while locked in their cells, they did not have access to medication. So medication would come on the unit. So for someone to be able to take their medication, receive their medication, they would have to line up and get their medication. If somebody is locked in, they would not be able to be locked out to receive those medications. So like I stated, these are severely mentally ill people. Now they have no access to medications. And on top of that, they're locked in a cell for weeks and weeks and weeks. And a lot of times, like I stated, we didn't really know the reasons. We had a patient who came from another mental health unit, and he was smearing feces there. So once he came on my unit, the officers said, and this is the term that they would use, he likes to play with shit, so he's going to be deadlocked. We're not letting him out. And that's what they did. So even if they heard about a patient from another unit, if they were told that person is aggressive or got into a fight, once they were transferred to my unit, they were deadlocked right away. And we knew who was deadlocked also because in the control panel in their bubble, they would put a white tag next to the cell number of the individual. And that's how the officers also knew that we're coming in for the later shift or on the weekend that somebody was on deadlock. Like I stated, they did not document this anywhere. So yes, so this is how it got to this point in me testifying in front of the Board of Corrections. And I really felt as a social worker, this is something that we would have to report. If we saw this happening in the community, we're mandated reporters, we would have to report this. But in the jail, it's like a different world. And those things, some things people feel like don't apply in the jail. But as I stated, being a social worker and being a mandated reporter, like seeing this type of abuse, I felt like it was the right thing to do to report this and let people know about it. And that's how like change can happen. Does anybody have any questions so far or any thoughts?
May I? Justyna, hi, it's so nice to meet you. And I
Yes.
want to thank you so much on behalf of everyone, the 122,000 plus who are still locked away in cells. And for what you're doing, it takes a rare courage. And I love you for it. Thank you so much.
Thank
Um,
you.
have you received any kind of threats from?
No, so I have not.
That's
Which
good.
is good. However, I do have a friend that still works there, and she told me Tuesday, the day the article came out, and when I testified, that everyone was talking about me in the jail. The officers were very upset, and one officer even said, well, if anything happens to her, if she's getting attacked, I'm going to turn my back, I'm not going to protect her. And then somebody said, well, she doesn't work here anymore, she left. And then that officer was like, oh, she got fired. And I also heard that from this individual that the officers are making it very difficult for the mental health staff there. When they come on the unit, the officers say things like, here come the snitches. And, they had nothing to do with this. They didn't even know what I was doing, but they're all just grouping that with me and just making it really uncomfortable for them on the unit.
Yeah. Thank you, Justyna. I mean, this is something that I think, having worked on Rikers Island myself, there's always this undercurrent of danger. You feel it, if you speak too loudly, that there going to be, sorry about that, repercussions. So you're really walking a fine line in there. And I think I would just like to say, do you think that there's any way that you could have spoken out and continued to work on Rikers?
No. No, I mean, especially with what I'm hearing, what people are saying about me now. My friend like said in a joking way, but he was serious. He's like, you're the most hated person right now in GRVC, which is the jail that I've worked in. So I can't ever imagine speaking out and working there. And I did think about my name not being out there and filing a formal complaint with the Board of Corrections. But I was very scared and paranoid because I was scared that they would find out it's me. I was very vocal about this. So I thought they would put two and two together and find out that like it was me.
New York.
Yeah.
York.
Okay. I think it's very telling, and I think that really speaks to I don't know, it speaks to the need for change, because I think that, again, having worked there myself, I think that healthcare workers are a very quiet but critical presence in jails and prisons. And I remember when I first started, I saw something that I ran to my supervisor and said, what do we do? What do we do? And they sat me down and explained that, well, we are a guest in their house. That's the big line you get all the time. Um,
Yes.
yeah, you're a guest in their house. And that really covers a lot of territory. And that means your thoughts about what they do are not welcome. And, you can be, you can be unguested in a very kind of dangerous way. And I really think that it's very difficult for people to live up to their codes of ethics, working in this setting. And it shouldn't be that way, because if there's ever a place where people are vulnerable, they're out of sight, out of mind, it is behind, it's in the cutoff world of prison. So, even more so is needed for us to stand our ground, so to speak.
Yes, I agree. And I've also heard other mental health staff say that they were told by their supervisors, if they're like seeing a use of force, to turn away, not look, because if they are looking, then they're going to have to write a report and there's going to be an investigation. So it's better to just turn your head and not look at what's happening.
Wow.
Mm.
Wow.
But also I've had, I'm sorry, Mary, I've had someone reach out to me who still works there, and this individual also wants to come forward, but not have his name out there because he's working there. And he told me about his experience. He wanted to attend a Board of Corrections meeting, and his supervisors gave him a very difficult time about it. They made an excuse that he didn't request it ahead of time. They tried to like tell him like, well, you shouldn't get involved with that and you should not go. And then when this article came out during their group supervision, they were talking about it, and he asked like, is this something we can also do, like what Justyna did? And the supervisor told him about like an NDA, like we're not supposed to disclose anything. But I told him that's not true, we didn't sign one. I'm sorry to laugh, but I mean, this is his supervisor like saying like there's an NDA. And I told him, well, if there was, I wouldn't be doing this and I would be in trouble. So he's very like discouraged to speak out.
Wow.
Mhm.
Was this a mental health staff person who told you there's an NDA?
Yes.
Well, that is really
Mhm.
disturbing that
Mhm.
a supervisor would be discouraging. You should be getting support, not
Mhm.
collusion. I just might add, anyone who has questions, feel free to use the, or you want to say anything to Justyna, feel free to use that hand feature there. And yeah, I have some more questions myself, but let me see. Let's go over here. All I see is H. Adams. Is that correct? Adams?
Yes, my name's Hannah. I'm wondering, you said like you always wanted to do criminal justice, but then you realize like maybe you can't do it from the inside, like being that close to it. So I'm wondering first, like, I think a lot of people realize that, but they're too maybe in it to do anything, like leave like you did. So I'm curious what your plans are now and like how you feel about that realization.
Yeah, so that was definitely difficult because I really did want to work there and I loved working with my patients. When I told them I was leaving, a lot of them said, oh, you're abandoning us, you're leaving us. And it was really difficult. I felt very guilty about leaving. And of course, I couldn't tell them what I'm planning to do. But I just promised myself, like, I'm going to continue fighting for them just from the outside where I can actually make real change. And I agree. I think some people stay there a very long time and, just want to like work in the most comfortable environment they can and may not speak out because they know that there's going to be repercussions for that. And My plans are, Friday, I did meet with the city council. There's also supposed to be investigating. Board of Corrections is also supposed to be investigating. We're trying to set up a hearing with me and DOC and just continue to speak out about this and keep up with this. Since I did all of this, I don't want this story to die. Right now, I'm being told that the officers are letting everyone out. Nobody is locked in, but I don't want this to be only for right now because there's a microscope on them. So I'm going to continue getting involved, speaking out about this, and working with the lawyers that I've been working with. Thank you.
Thank you. Sandy?
Justyna, the fact that an investigation is going to happen, doesn't that implicate everybody who works there and supervisors who knew this way before you arrived? And the collusion and the enabling and the cover up and turning the other way, you know, not fulfilling on their duty to care and their ethics. So, I mean, I can't, okay, so they let everybody out, right?
Mhm.
And then what's going to happen, right? So I'm just wondering, what do you think is going to happen when they do this investigation, especially if there's videos and all of the therapists knew this and all of the supervisors knew this? You know, what do you think is going to happen then?
Yeah, I'm not sure, but I've also heard that some of the mental health staff is really upset with me for doing this. They made statements like, well, this is making us look really bad. Yes, some of them are very angry with me, and these are licensed clinical social workers, licensed social workers. So I'm not sure what would happen with them. During the Board of Corrections meeting, CHS was there, which is CHS is through New York City Health and Hospitals, which I was employed by. And one of the board members did ask them if they oppose my statements, and they said no, they don't. And the chief psychiatrist said that he's heard this term deadlock since he started working there since 2017. So the members of the board asked, well, if you all knew that this was happening and if you don't oppose her statements, why haven't you reported? Like, why did it take her to work there, resign, and come out with it? So they're supposed to, for the next meeting, come up, show the board their policy for what they do if if they know the individual is not receiving medications because they're locked in. So I'm not sure what they will say during the next meeting, but yeah, they're also being looked at because, like you said, Sandy, they knew about this, and this is what the board said. You know, you don't oppose her statements. You're saying this is true. Why didn't you say anything sooner? Why didn't you tell us at one of the meetings?
Yeah.
And Jill, I'm sorry.
That's okay. No, yes, Jill. Jill, you're on mute. Jill, you're on mute.
You. I'm trying to unmute. I'm doing this from my phone, so sorry.
No problem.
Justyna, thank you so much for sharing your story. It's, you know, it took a lot of courage. I'm a social worker too. It took a lot of courage to do that. And so I just want to say thank you because I think that's really brave. And it makes me very proud when social workers stand up for what they see. I just have a question because I don't have a good understanding of when you say like these poor people are locked into these cells. I guess it would be helpful for me just for a reference point. Who decides that the individuals have done something so bad that they have to be locked in their cells? It's the corrections officers. So
Yes.
there's no psychiatrist that has to sign off on this.
So there is no psychiatrist that signs off. There's no documentation of it because from DOC, because they're not supposed to be doing this, so they would never document it. But it is DOC. We're told mental health staff, we never even suggest to have someone locked in. So it is DOC, and like I stated before, we would speak to the officers and try to have the individual come out, and certain officers would say yes, and certain officers would say no. So we knew which officers would say yes, and sometimes we had to wait. So when the individual is screaming, banging, a lot of times I would have to go and speak to the patient and tell the patient, like, for today, can you not scream or bang? Tomorrow, so-and-so is coming. I'll speak to them about letting you out, but can you just not do this for a day? And of course, it was impossible for this individual not to do it because they've already decompensated and they're unable to control their behavior. So there was a lot of planning and strategy with that, because we knew, okay, this officer is here today. They're not letting anyone out, so we're not even asking. So it was them, and they could say no to us. Like, I've asked officers before and they said, no, I'm not letting this person out. Sometimes they would say, well, I'm the only one on the unit, so I'm not letting this individual out. And they would say, well, now he's banging and screaming, so I'm not letting him out because it's unsafe. But yes, he's banging and screaming because he's locked in a cell for weeks and weeks. And they would also say, well, we're not letting him out. He's smearing feces. Yes, because he's locked in. So there was a huge disconnect. And I don't know if they use that as an excuse to continue having this individual locked in, or they really just did not understand.
And is it, if I may, just, I'm trying to just wrap my head on this because it's so disturbing, but
Mhm.
is it written down in a policy that if an individual's locked in, they're not entitled to receive their medication? Or is this something that they just do that they're not supposed to do?
Right, so that's a great question, and that came up during the Board of Corrections meeting. I believe that it's this is what I heard, it's in the nurses' policy that they do not give medication cell side. Now, there were few nurses, very few nurses who would do it, but they don't have to. But even if they would, I mean, when an individual has decompensated with their smearing feces, banging, screaming, if you go up to that individual's cell and try to give them medications, they're not going to take it. Sometimes they don't even respond to us. So I think the bigger issue is that they're locked in.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And
Eddie?
This is Eddie.
Yes, I, like everybody else, would like to congratulate you, Justyna. I don't know where you get such tremendous courage to continue, but you're an admirable person. I want to suggest a radical idea here. It seems to me, and I don't know anything about prisons, so this is probably a stupid suggestion, but I wonder if it were possible to change the systemic structure there so that the mental health person headed, typically in mental health, the psychiatrist has the greatest power, that a whole new structure be suggested where the mental health people have the basic decision power, and that the people locking people up are under them, and the decisions structurally have to be made by mental health. It seems to me from the little things you're saying that systemically, when you said you're coming to our home, that the power does not rely in mental health. And it seems to be in mental health, and this is a stupid idea since I know nothing about prisons, it seems that structurally, the power you should suggest, I'm suggesting that possibly you suggest, if you think this has any validity, that the whole structure change, that in mental health cells, the decision power rests in the psychiatrist. I say psychiatrist because psychiatrists are always more important than social workers or psychologists, but that the power remain in the mental health, and that the whole structure is that the people locking people up are the employees of the mental health, and that the mental health people make all the decisions.
right. Yeah, that would be wonderful. Our decision always would be not to lock anyone in. But like Mary said and I said, we're in their house. This is what I was always told, like we're in their house, we're in DOC's house. And if they want to lock someone in, like we could advocate and try to get that individual out, but this is something that they can do.
Yeah. I would just like to comment on that for a moment because, Justyna and I have spoken since this whole, since she broke in the news, etc. And, for those of you who don't know me, I worked in a similar capacity on Rikers Island, but it was as a clinical social worker, and I was an assistant chief of mental health. And, but it was about 20 years ago. So we're kind of bookends in time, striking to me how very little has changed. But I would say this, we did have more say. We did not have people locked in like that. There's been some type of a shift that's taken place because that would just not have happened. This is a different dynamic. We did have what Eddie is referring to. We had total authority when it came to the mental observation units. They told us what they wanted constantly, but we didn't have to go along with it. And they kind of hated us and liked us and hated us, depending on the weather, whatever. But this is really a very disturbing, and it's something that I've heard about in other prisons across the country. But the way that what's evolved here is bad. And I also think that this certainly constitutes solitary confinement. And we're in a state now where this is presumably against the law to hold people beyond X number of hours. I don't know how they're justifying getting around that law, because if you're holding people for days, weeks, months, it's solitary confinement.
Yes, and this is why they do not document this, and they know, and I've been told that they know that they're not supposed to be doing this, but they continue to do it. And mental health has authority over who gets moved from mental observation unit to general population. Like Mary stated, a lot of times they want to or demand that we move certain individuals because that individual disrespected them and they don't think that person's really mentally ill, they're faking it and things like that. And when you don't do that, when you don't move the individual, it could become a very uncomfortable environment. And I had some officers that didn't even speak to me. I would come on the unit and say good morning, and they didn't even respond because they were upset because I didn't send someone to general population who doesn't qualify because he disrespected an officer.
Yeah. That I relate to. Tremendous pressure put on the mental health staff. They will put their 2 cents in everywhere. This guy is faking it. He needs to go to population. This guy in population, you need to put on. And this is with absolutely no mental health training at all. And they fully expect all of us to be kind of the pawns that we just rubber stamp whatever it is that they want. And the pressure is constant. And you really need a very good, I was fortunate we had a very good supervisors, 2 of them, who could hold their ground and say, well, we will evaluate them and we'll assess. Thank you for that information. We will consider that in our decision. And they didn't like that, of course.
No.
It's our house. But at the end of the day, suicide risk, things of that nature took precedence over security risks. And
Yes.
that was well established, well known.
Yeah, and I had officers tell me, take him off suicide watch. He's not really suicidal. I said,
Yeah.
no, I cannot take this individual off suicide watch. Like their brother just died. But they would try to pressure me and tell me like, yeah, this person's not really suicidal. They're doing it for other reasons. They should come off.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And of course,
And-
I didn't listen because
Right.
my clinical decision, but they would put the pressure.
Sure. And you know full well that if you did take someone off a suicide watch and they killed themselves, they would wash their hands. Oh, that was mental health who took them off. Then they don't know anything.
Mhm.
So, yeah. All right, we have a couple more questions. I'm going to go to people who haven't spoken yet. Keyshawn?
Sorry, thank you. So like everybody else, thank you for everything that you've done. As like a current MSW student, it's like really commendable your actions, and it's just amazing to witness. I'll try to make it quick. In terms of like, let's say monitoring the change, because now you intend on working outside of the jail and the correction setting, and how would you, it's almost like a two-part question, because like things that I see now as like a current intern and like an MSW student, I intern at a shelter and a long-term substance abuse program, and you get the, even pursuing social work, you get the consensus that, oh, you're the type of person who feeds the cats, and they're the reason that they keep showing up at the back door, and like you're looked at as somebody to not be taken serious and making serious change, and almost like being that salmon swimming against the stream. So the two-part question would be, how do you intend on monitoring if there's actual change from the outside now? And what would your suggestion be to somebody looking to enter that field and actually trying to incite change within the forensic setting? Because the, as you see, the correctional is turning into the new modern day psychiatric hospital. So how would you penetrate that field and actually make change? I guess just going into it.
Right. So even if they like make comments about you, my advice is just to keep doing the work that you're doing because you're there for the clients, the patients, and not let that impact you or affect you. And I think it's really important that we do work in these types of settings to see what the real issues are, so then we can do something more to change that, because I would have never thought this was happening if I did not work on Rikers. It was a traumatic experience, but I'm happy that I had this experience because I was able to see what it's really like. So to your second question, I think it's important to get involved with a lot of organizations, advocates that are doing the work that you want to do. And I know there was a question here, if I found it easy or difficult to find the right lawyers. So I did not, because I was very into criminal justice reform. I followed a lot of lawyers, advocates on social media. I knew a person who was incarcerated for 25 years, who works for Queen's Defenders. I spoke to him about this. He connected me to the lawyer there, and then she connected me to the lawyers I work with. So it's really important to connect with these people, and they've been so supportive, and it made it just a lot easier to come out because I had that support.
Wow.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that does answer my question a lot. I guess a little clarity there would be in terms of being the odd one out and being the social worker, and then maybe not, kind of like you showed in Rikers, where they didn't document what they were doing with the locking them in and not knowing about it or being aware, because you are that mental health advocate. So then these things are happening behind closed doors and they purposely would not let it be shown. Like, what would be a way, I guess, to fight against that in your best judgment?
I mean, I felt like I couldn't really fight against that while I was there. So it really depends on your environment. Of course, you need to speak to your supervisor, to the director, see how they're reacting to this, and maybe some change can happen from within, but it depends on the environment. I felt like there was nothing I could do in Rikers, and that's why I decided to leave, because I felt like, you know what, I can do a lot more not working there. But like I said, it just depends on the environment.
Yeah. Thank you. Shayna?
Sorry, it took me a minute to figure out how to unmute. Yeah, I was just curious about the solitary, because I'm in Tennessee, and I know when they do solitary, or not solitary, when they do suicide watch, it's almost like a punishment here, and like they're not allowed to wear anything but like this paper thin outfit in a very cold cell, and they're left there like all night by themselves, and it's like prisoners, like, or incarcerated people. Oh, hold on. Sorry, I have kids. But I was just wondering if it is much better there for that. And then also, yeah, that was like my biggest question, the differences in the policies.
Mm. So when an individual is put on suicide watch, they're supposed to have all of their property removed and they're supposed to wear this like green smock. A lot of times that does not happen, which is the problem. And while they're on suicide watch, they can be out on the unit, they're not locked in, they can, participate in group. But a lot of times we had this issue where they still had their property and this person was actually suicidal. And we were afraid that they have their property and they can do something to themselves. So a lot of times we had to send numerous emails to DOC saying this person's on suicide watch and has all of their property and clothes and he's on suicide watch.
Okay,
So
I think ours
I
is more
feel like
similar.
a lot, yeah, I'm sorry. So I feel like a lot of time they didn't take it as seriously as it should be taken. And that goes back to what I said. A lot of them thought like this person's not really suicidal. They're not going to do anything.
Yeah, I was just gonna say where I am, it was more like I think it was more like a punishment. They didn't take it seriously, and then they made it into more of like a punishment. It seems like here, so where the people feared saying like they were suicidal.
Thank you.
Thank you, Shayna. Stephanie, your hand has been up for a while.
That's okay. Thank you. First of all, Shana, I just really want to, Justyna, I want to acknowledge all the hard work that you are doing. And I'd like to just have a different perspective. I mean, I'm an LICSW in Massachusetts with close to 50 years experience and never imagined interfacing with the criminal justice system until my son, who's also a social worker, went off medication, became psychotic, and is now entrenched in the criminal justice system.
Mm.
And I am I'm involved with this advisory committee from the hospital where he is, which is technically under the Department of Corrections. And as a parent, as a family member, our meetings really focus on how far we can advocate for change without fear of retaliation. So it's really an interesting perspective for me to be a social worker entrenched with my son and be on the other side of worrying about will he be retaliated against. And I know when there have been some outspoken situations, even though I had an appointment at the Department of Corrections, the guards would even give me a hard time. And I'm like one of the easiest people to get along with. So the issue of retaliation is real on multiple levels.
Yes, it is. It is. And that happens often. Also, what I found is the officers who knew that the patient had family and had access to their lawyers, they never locked these individuals in. From my experience, they would lock in individuals that are lower functioning, that do not have those community supports, because they knew like this individual, for example, is married, and if we lock him in and his wife doesn't hear from him in 4 hours, she will be calling the jail. So they would lock in those individuals that didn't have that support, that couldn't advocate for themselves. And during my testimony, I talk about one patient in particular who went to OMH, to the hospital to be restored to fitness, came back, and he was taking responsibility for being locked in for so long. He said, yeah, because I was doing all that crazy stuff, that's why they locked me in. Like, he thought that it was like his fault, which was really heartbreaking. And I told him like, no, it doesn't matter. Like what you were doing, like you were not supposed to be locked in.
Yeah. I just want to second that. In my experience on Rikers, people who had, you would think it's the opposite, people who pestered the warden, whatever, might be retaliated against, but it wasn't. It was, if there was an awareness that people were watching or connections on the outside, those people were left alone more so than, as Justyna said, lower functioning people without any, connections.
Right. I had individuals on my unit who assaulted other patients and they were never locked in. And of course, I wouldn't want them to be locked in, but they assaulted patients numerous times. The officers never locked them in, but another individual, lower functioning, was looking at a female officer in a weird way and made her feel uncomfortable, and he's locked in.
The whole thing is rotten. And people don't know it, and that's what our goal is, that they start to know the reality of this. All right, we have a few minutes left. Hannah, I see your hand is up.
Yeah, it kind of is related to the last question, but when you were debating like whistleblowing, did you have to balance the retaliation that they might face? Because also in Mary Buser's book, like you talk about there's only so much I can help them with. I have to think about like the retaliation. So how did you balance like that possibility?
So I felt like the patients that were locked in, I felt like they would not be retaliated because like they would know that this was something that I did and not them individually. And I knew that they would have to be like locked out, but I didn't see them being like retaliated against because the officers would know that this is not them, that this is something that I did. And I know there's concerns when they talk to individuals, when they talk to lawyers, when those patients individually speak, there's concern that there may be retaliation, but it wasn't like one particular or few people from the unit, like they knew that this was me.
Yeah. Thank you. We have Frank, we have one more before we wrap up. Did you have a question, Frank?
Yeah, I just wanted to respond to Eddie about the systemic problem. And you're right. You're right, because the foundation of prisons are built and based on solely the concept of punishment. There's nothing to do with rehabilitation. I spent almost a year on a psych ward at Northern Nevada Correctional Center, which is touted as being a great mental health unit facility and medical facility. And I was up there in that psych ward for close to a year. And to me, it was the same as solitary confinement. Mentally ill people that were up there. And I mean, I know the fakers from the real ones, trust me. And there were guys in there, I was just amazed at how can they even be in prison? How could you convict these people of a crime? It's just mind-boggling. But when you put them in prison, they automatically become prisoners and they are treated as prisoners. They don't care about the mental health aspect. That's beyond them, so they don't care. The most important thing to them is safety and security. That trumps all medical personnel.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Safety and security. And so Eddie's right. It has to be changed from within systemically. And the foundation has to be crushed and rebuilt.
Mm-hmm.
You can't fix something that's based on something that's broken, which is the concept of punishment.
Yeah.
Yes. And these individuals should not be in jail to begin with.
Exactly. Exactly.
Every patient that I had, all of them, when they were arrested, were not on their medication.
Yeah.
Homeless on the street, unmedicated. So that needs to be changed also. Like they should not be there in the first place.
That's right.
Agreed. Thank you, Frank, for raising that. We're gonna have to wrap up, but maybe we could continue afterwards, Frank. I don't mean to cut you off, but I do want to say be mindful of people's time, and thank you all for coming, and spread the word. You know, that's something that Frank always says too. Let people know. Spread the word. People need to know that it's not what you watch on TV, and that we really, really need to fight for people with mental illness. You know, they need us, and we've got to have a better system to begin with. That's for starters. And then we also need more people like Justyna who are going to speak up. And this, again, we applaud you, and thank you for coming. I mean, really, this was such a courageous, you had no idea where this was going to take you. And, you know, something you expressed to me is that you're just beginning, and you know, we're right there with you. We're going to stop here. If anyone wants to stay on a little longer, that's fine, but otherwise we're going to officially you know, end the meeting. So thank you all for coming.
Thank you so much, and thank you for all the support. It's been so great and unexpected.